The Coffin of Andy and Leyley, although I guess since Leyley is a nickname for Ashley, technically it should be pronounced the Coffin of Andy and Leyley, but that sounds weird, so I'm gonna stick with Leyley, is something of a phenomenon right now. I don't know about the Jormai 49ers, but I, personally, haven't been able to escape hearing about it for weeks. It's likely a combination of the fact that there are just an overwhelming amount of posts on the internet about it right now, and the fact that my Twitter algorithm thinks I'm into some freaky stuff. But posts about this game have quickly invaded my life and taken over my timeline. A quick search of the game will show you that despite clearly being an indie game with a very small development team created in the simplistic game development program RPG Maker, the mainstream has certainly taken note of the Coffin of Andy and Leyley. Though, of course, whether or not that's a good thing is subjective. Furthermore, taking a peep at the Steam page, whoops, let's get rid of that for now. Anyway, taking a look at the Steam page shows us thousands of reviews, with the game receiving the coveted overwhelmingly positive label, which is awarded only to games with a 95% positive review ratio. And of course, this is displayed proudly right beneath the cover image in the art style that has haunted my internet presence for weeks. What a sight to behold. But speaking of my internet presence, let's take a look at some of the posts that prompted me to make this video in the first place. Starting us off strong with 1.5 million views. Thread of games you should play instead of the shitty incest game. That's some pretty strong language from someone whose first choice was Lego City Undercover, but I'll give him a pass. Is there an incest game cult on Twitter? Why are there so many? The creator of cannibalistic incest game versus Dogsters. Battle of Myths. Okay. Oh no, the person who made the incest game got doxxed. Oh no, so sad. Man, Twitter is a cold place. 98% positive because 2 people actually played it and rated it, while the other 9 players of the entire user base rated it high to quote, own the libs. Okay, I know this isn't a serious argument because this tweet came from fella Pokemon 333, but come on. Thread of incest games you should play after playing the wait, what? Stop putting the incest game on my timeline. You know, I felt the same, but here we are now. Mario's got so much good shit coming out right now, y'all don't need to be playing anything else. Let alone an incest game. Like if you're gonna buy something non-Mario right now, for some reason, at least make it good. I watched a VTuber play the cannibal incest game. Story is really good, art is nice. I hope they make more chapters despite the creator stepping back. Replying to a tweet about the attempted doxing of the creator of the game, what did they expect when they made a game with incest? It's all so tiresome. Let me just enjoy my funny incest game in peace. People losing it over some incest indie game when I watched this whole anime in 2006 where one of the main characters agonizes over being sexually attracted to his adopted okay. Hates the incest game, docs incest game dev, continues to have pictures of incest game saved. I just don't understand how their brain works anymore. Listen, I'm gonna try not to take sides, but I don't understand how anybody's brains are working right now. But let's get back to the Steam page. In the game's description, we can already see outright that it'll touch on toxic relationships, codependency, starvation, murder, and cannibalism, of course, right? All very normal things. Notably, there's no mention of the big one, the one no-no that seemingly everyone is upset about, but don't worry, we'll get to that. Now, considering the past success of other indie horror games, some of which have sprouted cult followings that persist to this day, like Corpse Party, Amnesia, and if you want to get all newfangled and emotionally deep, Omori, maybe we shouldn't be surprised about the explosive popularity of this game. After all, the aforementioned games have all undeniably benefited from online discourse, whether it be the result of YouTube Let's Plays or fiercely dedicated fans on Twitter. So it shouldn't be that shocking that the Coffin was catapulted to fame or notoriety through online discussion, but something about the whole situation just struck me as odd. It wasn't just that people were somehow forgetting the horrid things that have happened in other video games before, and if you really want an example of a disturbing indie game, look into games like Lisa the Painful, which have implications of rape, violence, torture, gore, and more. Or even the atrocious things like war crimes, cannibalism, and child predation that are touched on in more mainstream games. And it wasn't just the fact that people on the internet were pretending to be morally outraged at the inclusion of a theme like incest in an indie horror video game. The same people who, mind you, then turned around and attempted to dox the personal information of the game's developer, including her personal address, with supposedly pure motives. No, the one thing that truly stood out to me was that even with all of this outrage, backlash, and ridiculous behavior, I found that it seemed the vast majority of people speaking on this game had seemingly never played it, or even seen comprehensive gameplay of it. Out of the morally outraged, the repulsed, the disgusted, those who were shocked to learn that there even existed a game with something this horrible in it, it seems many of them didn't even know the context of the scenes in which the theme occurred. Now, I want to nip this in the bud right here. This is in no way a defense or endorsement of any of the themes expressed in the game. It's just me presenting the facts, and they are facts that I find very interesting. And while you all might think it's a small thing to get stuck on in the grand scheme of things, I want you to consider the fact that people were so butthurt by this game's existence that they went out of their way to dox the creator's private information to the internet. If that person's info was leaked by someone who didn't even play the game that they supposedly found so egregious as to prompt an invasion of privacy this immense, then I think that really says something. But we'll get more into the aftermath of the game later, after I've gotten to something very important. Because with that setup out of the way, it's time, Draw My 49ers, for me to get back to my roots. I may have mentioned it before in a previous video, but I'm something of a video gamer myself. You might be able to tell from my profile picture, which is the main character from the survival horror series The Evil Within. And if you were one of the select few who saw my channel before I made the transition to edutainment content, you'll certainly know of my immense gaming prowess. And even though my content doesn't currently reflect that, it's about to. So buckle up, Draw My 49ers. We're going rogue. We're going where other edutainment channels wouldn't dream of going. We're going boots on the ground. It's time to play some horror video games. And before you all protest that you don't want to see something as horrifying as the incest game, that it's too much for your morally pure eyes, etc., don't try it. YouTube analytics tattled on the most used search term by viewers from my Meowba video, which is by far the largest on my channel, and this game is literally my viewers' #1 search. And you guys weren't searching incest game or game with incest or something, you guys were searching the full name. You knew exactly what you were looking for, so don't act like you weren't curious. Anyway, so yes, I decided to purchase and play the Coffin of Andy and Leyley. Let's hope I don't regret this. You know, immediately after my purchase went through, I did have a bit of doubt. I had heard from multiple sources that the incest was supposedly part of a dream sequence, or that it was contextualized to show that it was a bad thing, which would obviously make it at least a bit better than if it was glorified like Twitter seems to think it was. But after viewing the Steam community content for this game, I was starting to lose my nerve. I mean, this seems pretty overt, but I came here to give the game a chance, and subject myself to whatever horrors it had in store for me, and I'm not going down without a fight. If I did, I wouldn't be the epitome of integrity that you all know me to be. So, here we go. Before I start going through the events of the game, I think it's best we start with an overview of the plot. So here's the setup. Andrew and Ashley Graves are two siblings who are trapped in their apartment where they live together. They can't have food delivered, trash removed, supplies ordered, etc., etc. Their mother also notably won't pick up the phone at all. She seems to have given them up for dead the second she got an opportunity to. They are trapped and guarded by a warden who doesn't seem to care if they live or die. It's soon revealed that this is all due to their exposure to a tainted water source that has exposed them to a parasite with a comfy death count of 53. It's worth noting right off the bat that the humor here is very Tumblr-y. I don't really know what to call it. There are lots of jokes, like when you interact with a trash can, it says, "In the trash lie your hopes and dreams, exactly where they belong." For another example, the game gets oddly aggressive when it asks you if you want to save. This is obviously just a reflection of the writer's sense of humor, but I find it interesting. Another thing I find interesting, and not in the greatest way, is I don't like how lascivious the characters look when they talk. It makes me feel uncomfortable. Maybe it's because I've been primed to go into this game thinking a certain way, but I really don't like the sly grins on these characters' faces. The art certainly is very expressive though, for better or worse. But back to our protagonists, Andrew and Ashley. If we take a look at the Steam page, we can see a graphic that sums up their dynamic pretty well. Honestly, I gotta cut it some slack. Ashley is extremely obsessed with Andrew and possessive to the point of sending his girlfriends countless death threats, and as an even better example, when they were children, she convinced Andrew to help her lock her friend in a chest overnight at an abandoned warehouse just because that friend said she liked Andrew. Surprise, surprise, the girl was dead in the morning, much to the anguish of Andrew and to the glee of Ashley, because then she was able to use this as leverage in order to force Andrew to do whatever she said, lest she tattle on him to the police. Hearing this, you might think, as I did, that Ashley is our only irredeemable character, but despite being more relatable and certainly more passive than Ashley, Andrew's not a real winner himself. For one, he obviously could have stopped Ashley at any point from committing the horrible acts she takes great pride in. Furthermore, later in the story, he starts to noticeably change. We won't get into that now, but I should discuss one more thing. The nicknames used in the title, Andy and Leyley, obviously short for Andrew and Ashley. They're symbolic for a number of reasons, but essentially, Andrew and Ashley are constantly fighting over what they should refer to each other as. Ashley wants to remain in the past, where she was the only part of her brother's life. She insists on calling him Andy, to his extreme chagrin. Andrew wants to graduate from the nickname because it represents his past misdeeds as well as the younger version of himself that Ashley completely owned. This transition to Andrew is more meaningful than it initially seems, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. With all that yapping out of the way, I think it's about time we get to the events of the story, which, by the way, took me somewhere in the ballpark of 3 to 4 hours to complete, since only 2 chapters have currently been released. Also keep in mind that I took a monster dump in the middle of playing, so my hours are not accurate in the slightest. Naturally, let's begin with Chapter 1. The game starts off relatively calm, depicting Andrew and Ashley's depressing life as they slowly starve to death trapped in their apartment. However, things pretty quickly escalate as we promptly witness our main characters engage in cannibalism. However, it's much more understandable than I expected it to be. Don't get me wrong, it's disgusting, but they were starving to the point that Ashley would regularly black out in the midst of an average household activity, and they were completely out of food. Then, their neighbor conveniently happened to die in the midst of a botched demonic ritual while they were watching. It was literally a choice between life and death for them, and as disgusting as it seems, I can see the rationalization. But for coming instances, if any, of cannibalism, well, I'm less inclined to understand where they're coming from. In the reactions to this action though, we learn a lot about our characters. Andrew is conflicted, feeling extreme guilt and needing his conscience to be soothed by Ashley when he's kept up late at night by the implications of consuming another human being. Ashley, on the other hand, well, she seems to have taken a bit more pleasure in the deed than you'd expect. Even if I understand why they did what they did in this life or death scenario, I certainly don't understand being so carefree about it. In fact, I was honestly very surprised throughout the entire first chapter that this game is infamous for supposedly having incest, because for a long time I was convinced that Andrew agreed with me in thinking that Ashley was an insufferable sociopath with 0 redeemable qualities. Take this scene later in the chapter for example. After literally killing the warden to save Ashley's life, even though he was so morally conflicted over eating a corpse that he hadn't even killed, Andrew was still jerked around and treated like crap by Ashley. Then, at the chapter's climax, the siblings set up a convoluted trap that involves holding a demonic ritual and luring the second warden into the room so that they can offer the demon his soul. In order to accomplish this, Andrew holds their downstairs neighbor, who the wardens refer to as Hot, at cleaver point and threatens her into calling the remaining warden up to the ritual room. When Ashley returns from the ritual's success, the lady is dead. Andrew claims that he'd let her go for just a second, only for her to attempt to shoot him with a nail gun, forcing his hand. However, Ashley is immediately convinced the only reason Andrew could have possibly killed the woman is that he had attempted to sleep with her and she had rejected his advances. Since she detests every time he tries to get a girlfriend, she flies off the handle, leading him to say things like this. He also loses his temper, choking her temporarily, and getting my hopes up that I somehow reached a special ending in which he was going to nip the incest rumors in the bud immediately by killing her. But don't worry, he lets her go, and there's still much character development to be had. Again, for better or worse. I feel like that's quickly becoming this video's motto. Anyway, after this, we're sort of at the end of chapter 1, at least in terms of significant events. I mean, in the demonic ritual intended to kill the warden, Ashley obtains a demonic talisman that grants her the power to have clairvoyant dreams, which will be very important later. She also steals the warden's gun, meaning they have a more effective method of protecting themselves now. Oh, and Ashley's dead set on their next target being their mom, who had no qualms with leaving them to starve to death in their apartment, though honestly, I'm starting to understand where she was coming from with that. But now, with the tremulous relationship between Andrew and Ashley reaching a breaking point, and them finally being free from their prison of filth and starvation, we can move to chapter 2. And don't worry if you found chapter 1's description boring, there'll be much more to go over in chapter 2, trust me. Though in the first few scenes, there's really nothing of note. There was, however, an interaction that really tipped me off to the fact that the creator of this game may not have had many interactions with people in real life. If you, playing as Ashley, step in front of Andrew while he's watching the TV, the following conversation will take place. Hey, get your fat ass out of the way. Ass? I think you meant my awesome fat tits, you cocksucker. What?
What?
Move, you cow! Whatever, wanker. When I first played through this scene, I laughed for 5 minutes straight. You cannot make this up. This is I can't even say anything. This is not how real people talk. I don't know if you guys have seen those memes that show like blank if it was written by VizzyPop, and then it just has a million cuss words in the title. This is a survival horror game if it was written by VizzyPop. Anyway, after this, our darling dearies drift off to sleep, and Ashley actually has her first clairvoyant dream, which involves an unknown assassin entering their room as they sleep and slitting their throats. Obviously, they feel inclined to stop this, so they decide to leave the room, wait for him to enter, lure him back out, and ambush him in the park. I may or may not have skipped over the dialogue here and run straight up to the closet, which triggered an instant death since that's where the killer was hiding, but I'll actually just chalk it up to my gaming prowess, since dying there got me a special achievement for reaching an early ending. Great. In the midst of this, some side events happen that I'll skip over because I'm assuming their payoff isn't in the game yet. For example, there's a whole cult subplot where Andrew infiltrates a cult club meeting. I don't really know what that's about yet, but it's not really relevant. Anyway, Andrew and Ashley's ambush goes off without a hitch, and after shooting their would-be assassin dead, they obviously help themselves to his things. They find out that he was sent directly to kill them specifically. Maybe this will have a plot payoff at a later date, but for now, it's meaningless information. What is not meaningless though, is that they steal his car and are now free to make their way to their parents' house. Their plan is initially just to rob them, but I don't really trust that. Along the way, Ashley gets a visit from the demon that gave them the talisman in her dreams. It tells her that, unfortunately, she'll need to charge up her talisman with human souls if she wants to use its power again. But considering that she's currently on her way to see her parents, who have, in her mind, abandoned her for dead, she hatches an idea you could probably see coming. Once they arrive at their parents' house, they begin ransacking it for anything of value, noting that their parents possess a doctored death certificate for the both of them. Apparently, this was done to collect a life insurance policy their mother had conveniently put out on them. However, in the midst of their discoveries, their mother returns home. After a surprisingly anticlimactic scene, it's decided that they'll stay for dinner. After that, Andrew prepares dinner and they all eat together in another scene that is surprisingly mundane. Afterwards, their mom seems just as concerned as I am about their midnight deeds, so she separates them for the night, making Ashley sleep in the basement and Andrew sleep on the couch in the living room. After they drift off to sleep, Andrew has a dream that explores the horrific extent to which his sister harassed and threatened his past girlfriend. This stuff is absolutely brutal. I don't even want to show most of it. Andrew also makes some very interesting comments suggesting that he doesn't actually care as much about this as he probably should, and then he is awoken, of course, by Ashley. It's here that we get the closest scene yet to the dreaded deed, and of course it's accompanied by Ashley urging Andrew to help her kill their parents. Their mom finds them in the midst of this and Ashley goes ballistic. This results in them herding their mother down to the basement where they plan to ritualistically sell her soul. If you're thinking this all escalated pretty quickly, yes, it did. Also, in the midst of all this, their father returned home. I didn't mean to gloss over him, but, well, it seems like that was kind of the point. I mean, the creator didn't even bother drawing a specialized sprite for when he talks. He's barely even a character. Anyway, after some more Tumblr-grade humor about sex toys, our bona fide serial killers have their parents tied up in the basement ready to be sacrificed. It's at this point that the game gave me somewhat of an opportunity to stop the madness. See, at a certain point, Ashley leaves in order to go to an ATM and withdraw their parents' money. During this period of time, you get to control Andrew, and you get to choose whether or not to accept your parents' pleas for help and set them free. Now, believe me, I was tempted, but given that the objective of this entire playthrough was to brave the madness and see the absolute worst this game had to offer, I had to decline. I needed to see just how far the madness would go. So, against my better judgment, I knocked over the first domino in a long chain that would result in my mom accusing me of incest, then me selling her and my father's souls to a demon, hacking up their corpses and dropping them in the ocean, but not after enjoying some hearty parent stew. In-game I meant. I hope that was clear. Yes, you heard it right, my 49ers. More cannibalism. Also patricide, matricide, parent side, yeah. And naturally, our heroes express very little remorse. Even Andrew, who was seemingly just having a mental breakdown over eating some random stranger in a life or death situation, is now joking at the dinner table as he munches on his mommy. This is a great representation of the transition that I mentioned earlier, the transformation from Andy into Andrew. Even Ashley is taken aback by Andrew's nonchalance and lack of guilt at their so obviously reprehensible misdeeds. I mean, does this look like the weird floating overworld sprite of someone racked with guilt over boiling their own parents in a stew? No, not to me it doesn't, and I have a feeling this character arc is far from over. But with all of that out of the way, Andrew and Ashley finally have an extra potent charge in their demonic talisman and are ready to have a clairvoyant dream. Because apparently when the demon said an occasional clairvoyant dream, it meant conveniently every single night that you have it charged up. Now I know you my 49ers, you're antsy. You just got off scrolling TikTok for an hour and the skibbity toilet echoing around in your cavernous heads is telling you that it's been too long since something interesting happened. Basically, you want what you came for. Well, if you can remember all the way back before I started recounting the events of this game's plot, you might recall me saying that I'd heard the incest scene was part of a quote-unquote dream sequence. And our two protagonists just charged up their clairvoyant dream machine. And for some reason, they're insistent on both of them touching the talisman so they have a joint clairvoyant dream when they go to sleep. Do you see where I'm going with this? Because I saw where it was going when I was playing. Heck, as soon as they even mentioned clairvoyant dreams all the way back in the first chapter, my stomach dropped. But I digress. Suffice it to say, I was a bit nervous as our two darling cannibals drifted off to Neverland. But I pressed on. Now, when the dream began, I was greeted by some very on-the-nose puzzles. Basically, the goal is to take the Andrew doll away from the other dolls and make it stay with the Ashley doll. I wouldn't exactly call it subtle. However, the final puzzle at the end of the line is a bit different. It's easy enough to solve it the normal way. It tells a very simple childhood story. Without all the murder and deceit, it's a tale as old as time. Brother and sister have fun together, brother gets a girlfriend, sister's sad that he doesn't have time for her anymore. Upon solving the puzzle this way, the rightmost door is unlocked. If you attempt to go through, it labels itself the sane path to take. However, that's not what we came to see, is it? No. We're here to see the scene that shocked the world, and that, my dear Joe My 49ers, is not sane at all. So in a flash, my gamer instincts take over. I move the broken heart in between Andrew and his girlfriend. I move the sunshine over Ashley's head. And finally, I place the heart between Andrew and Ashley. And with a sickly glow, the left door activates. I steel myself and I walk through the door, officially taking the highly questionable route. And seeing as I don't really feel up to articulating what follows, I'll just quote an article I found that has graciously done it for me. As Anna Valens, writing for the Mary Sue, puts it, quote, "The two are shown naked in bed, relaxing after sex. Andy has visible scratch marks on his back, while Ashley sports a hickey and a bite mark. In the vision, Andy suggests sex with Ashley was mortifying, but a happy and satisfied Ashley implies he seemed to enjoy himself quite a bit mid-coitus." God, they're using so much vocabulary. After a bit of teasing, Andy cheers up and advances on Ashley once more, and the two start having sex again, when suddenly the vision ends and the pair wake up in their parents' bed. Ashley is mildly disturbed by the experience, while Andrew blushes uncontrollably. Playing as Ashley, the player can choose to tell Andy that the two would never have sex, or that Andy should never say never. Just to pull away from the quote for a second, which one do you think I did, guys? Which one do you think I did? I'll give you a guess. Why is this such a massive issue to you? We've done way worse things together, Ashley says, if the player chooses the latter option. I honestly figured it would happen eventually. So there we have it, the scene that broke the internet. Honestly, I don't know how to feel about it. Of course, the scene is disgusting. It made me feel really gross, and if someone had walked in on me in that moment, I would have been absolutely mortified at what was on my screen. But was I morally outraged? Honestly, I can't say that I was. And it's not that I approved of or condoned the action in any way. I'll tell you outright, I do not. As I said, I found the scene disgusting. It's just that by that point in time, I had realized something. This game is in absolutely no way a reflection of reality, or anything close to it. Somewhere in the midst of the demonic rituals, the multiple human stews, the crass jokes, the flirting and joking within minutes of a double murder, and the inhuman lack of emotions from both our protagonists, I realized that, to me, these characters had become something other than humans. They were caricatures, incarnations of the angst, sociopathy, taboo desires, and lack of inhibition that the artist had instilled in them. And then it hit me. This game is absolutely no different than a fan fiction, something to be found on a site like Wattpad, or locked away in the cringy recesses of an old Tumblr account. It's a story not about people, but about characters. And to be fair, I also did have to make a string of decisions that took me down the worst of two paths just in order to see this scene in the first place. I even had to solve a puzzle that involves placing a heart in between the two siblings. This isn't a defense of the events in any way at all, but to be fair, you had to really know what you were expecting if you explicitly solved the puzzle in this way. Honestly, all of this stuff about the characters not reflecting reality should have been obvious to us from the start, and I'm sure it was. All of those who bred hate and harassment, who misled with the purpose of whipping people into a frenzy and recruiting fellow haters, I'm sure they knew too. Or at least they should have known if they've done even a modicum of research on the thing which they act so passionate about. But either they didn't, or they did and they simply just don't care. So that brings us to the aftermath. Now, I've obviously already discussed what I've seen on Twitter, which is part of what prompted me to make this video in the first place. However, most of that was relatively harmless. It did involve an overwhelming amount of negativity about a project that was never intended to be anything that serious, and it has definitely encouraged harassment towards the creator and anyone who enjoys the game in any capacity. Actually, now that I mention it, the Twitter posts aren't that harmless, and it actually only gets worse from there. Eagle-eyed Jormy 49ers will recall from the earlier parts of this video that the creator of the Coffin of Andy and Leyley has actually had multiple dox attempts against them, supposedly in response to the game's morally outrageous themes. When dwelling on the internet, it's always important to remember that we all as individuals have a certain degree of power over other people, and with that power comes the responsibility to wield it properly. Our words and our actions can easily affect another person negatively, but this being the internet and it being mostly anonymous, it's very easy to forget that and lose empathy for others. I know there are people out there who find the themes touched on in the game very reprehensible. That's fine. In fact, I would argue that it's a very common opinion to have, considering the sentiments on the internet at this point in time. But I think the best way to handle this isn't with subterfuge, doxing, and arguments on the scale that we've seen so far. I think that more laid-back discussions would probably be the right way to resolve this kind of issue. Especially with issues on this scale. I mean, this game is essentially the equivalent of a dirty fan fiction that really has no effect on another person other than if they have to see a post about it and it ruins their day because it's so gross. This game is just gross. It's gross, crass, awkwardly written, bare bones, boring, and at times unbearably cringy. But at least it's something. I guess what I'm trying to say is this. While I respect the opinions of people on both sides of this controversy, I believe the internet would be just a much more constructive place as a whole if everybody would just give things a chance before speaking on them. But what do I know? I've just been your host, Jormy49. What a ride, and good night. Also, I know this video is a lot different from what I've been doing recently. It's a lot less heavily scripted, and to be honest, most of the runtime is just me playing a goofy video game, which you could call lazy if you were so inclined. I certainly also did a lot less research than I usually do. If anybody's actually watched this far, make sure to tell me what you thought of this format and of this subject material down in the comments section. Above all else, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.